UFC Charlotte betting and DraftKings show. We have 12 fights this Saturday afternoon. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the women's bantamweight division, we have Tinaro Lisboa, who is now a slight favorite at -115, with Jessica Rose Clark on the comeback at -105. And this is a matchup right off the bat that I think there could be value in Jessica Rose Clark, who opened up as a favorite. We've seen some heavy line movement on the UFC newcomer in Lisboa, but I'm not so sure. I understand the concerns with backing somebody like Jessica Rose Clark. She's historically untrustworthy. She's coming off multiple surgeries. There's always concerns with her. But I also think at some point, like looking at Lisboa, she comes from a Muay Thai striking background. She's fought basically nobody in terms of MMA. She fought Norma Dumont in her professional debut years back, and she got submitted in the first round. She had a Muay Thai fight against Valentina Shevchenko, which she lost, and that was back in 2010. Everyone else that she's fought, including Norma Dumont, she has 7 professional fights. She's 5-2. Only one of those fighters had a winning record at the time that she fought them. So this is a very low-level fighter that we really just don't have much data to go off of. We understand the striking background. It seems like she's a competent striker, has a little bit of power in her punches. But we've also seen her be taken down and out-grappled on the regional scene. I think that's going to be a factor in this matchup because Jessica Rose Clark, that's basically all she's going to look to do. This is someone that has relied on her wrestling a lot more over the last couple years here, and I expect that to be the case here, where she should have the biggest advantage. Again, it's tough to trust her, knowing her history, coming off the surgeries, some heavy line movement against her, but I have to back the fighter that I think is at least a competent UFC level fighter who should have the biggest advantage in the fight, and I think that is the takedowns, the control time. If she doesn't get submitted, I think she gets her hand raised. So we're going Jessica Rose Clark by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Gabe Green, a -135 favorite with the comeback on Bryan Battle at +115. And this is a matchup that I think has a wide range of outcomes in terms of DraftKings scoring. And the reason I say that is because both guys are kind of similar in a sense in that they're decent strikers, they're well-rounded fighters, but they're both extremely hittable in striking exchanges, and they're both easy to take down. Gabe Green defends takedowns at 53% in the UFC. Bryan Battle just 38%. And Battle's been taken down multiple times in all of his fights, except for that Takashi Sato fight, which he won by knockout in 45 seconds. So I think if anybody's going to be landing multiple takedowns here, I think both are capable, but I think it's more likely we see that from the Green side. I also think Green's going to be the one throwing more volume out there. But again, both of these guys are hittable. Green probably less durable as well. So there is definitely some factors to consider here. At the end of the day, I think it's a very competitive kickboxing match. Maybe one of them tries to wrestle a little bit. Again, I lean Green in terms of the wrestling, but both guys certainly capable. So this is one where for DraftKings, I'm not going to have a ton of these guys, but I'm also not ignoring them either because it basically comes down to whether or not they decide to wrestle, because I think either of them could land multiple takedowns. I'm just not sure that they will. So the official pick is going to be Green by decision. In terms of DraftKings, I'm going to have a little bit of exposure to both sides across multiple lineups this week. Next fight up, we have Geon Kim coming in as a -240 favorite. The comeback on Mandy Bohm is +200. And this is one where I think we clearly have the better fighter, the better striker in Geon Kim, who is the rightful favorite here. But she's coming off a lot of fights where over the course of her career, she's just in a lot of very competitive rounds. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of these coin flip fights not go her way, because she's unable to separate. Because while she's landing volume and landing offense, usually so is her opponent. Her defense is not that strong, and we've seen multiple times where she's getting tagged cleanly and it just doesn't look good in the judge's eyes. So even though she's a good striker, there's just not another element to her game. She's not going to look to grapple, and she gets hit as well. So it's just like a lot of these fights are going to look pretty close on the scorecards. Now, on the flip side, Mandy Bohm, if you guys have been listening to me for a while, you know that I think she is absolutely no good. She was 7-0 coming into the UFC. Watched the tape on her, did not look impressive to me whatsoever, and I think I faded her in both of her UFC fights so far. She's lost them both. I don't expect her to win this fight either. Like I said, I do think Kim is the better overall striker, but you have to factor in the context of the slate, because this is a card where I think a lot of favorites are going to win. We've had multiple cards recently where the dogs have been barking. I don't really think this is going to be one of those slates. And looking at DraftKings, anybody under 8K outside of Lisboa, who I think is going to be popular now that she's a small favorite at 7,800, outside of her and maybe some Douglas Silva de Andrade, who we'll get to later, who's only $100 cheaper, but under that $7,500 mark, I just don't really see many viable options, except one who I like, who we'll talk about later on the card. But I basically just think there's not many underdogs that are live this weekend. So even though I think Bohm is not a good fighter, I think because of the style that Kim fights with, Bohm can make this fight somewhat competitive, especially if she looks to maybe wrestle a little bit. I don't think she will. I'm just putting the case out there because the context of the slate at 7,300, if she just wins, I think she's relevant on this slate. We don't need much of a ceiling if only one, maybe two dogs win. So again, that price, 7,300, even though I think she loses, I'm likely going to have more exposure to her on DraftKings. But the official pick is Kim by decision. Next fight up, we have Natan Levy, a minus 245 favorite with the comeback on Pete Rodriguez at plus 205. And this is a matchup that I love targeting on DraftKings. The first couple fights, I'm not really targeting a whole lot. This fight, I'm likely going to have very heavy exposure to both sides. And the reason being, because on one hand, we have Natan Levy, who we know isn't the best fighter, but he does have good cardio, and we know he's going to mix in the takedowns. He averages nearly 5.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, and that's the most favorable fighting style to DraftKings scoring. So I think we have upside, even in a decision because of the wrestling upside, but I also think he's capable of finding a finish on the mat. He's a much better submission grappler than Pete Rodriguez. Rodriguez has not really been tested outside of round one. He's got 5 wins, all of which coming by first round knockout, and that's really what he has, is just big explosive power in those first couple minutes. But outside of that, I think you can expose the gas tank and the defensive grappling, and I think that's probably what happens here. I'm rooting for Pete to knock him out early, but I think the more likely outcome is we see Levy just grind him on the mat, takedowns over and over until he finds a submission. So we're going Levy by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, we have Cody Stamann, a minus 155 currently with the comeback on Douglas Silva de Andrade at plus 135. And this is one where I thought coming into the week I would be betting Cody Stamann, and then after digging into the matchup a little bit more, I decided I'm probably not going to bet Cody Stamann here. And the reason being is because even though I think Stamann wins, and that is going to be my pick, Stamann by decision, I'm not fully confident in that. And the reason being is because Silva de Andrade, yes, he's old. He's like 38 years old. He's taken a lot of damage over the course of his career. Even recently, he's taken a lot more damage as well. But he's very explosive. You know, he's got a ton of knockouts on his record. He's very powerful on the feet. And we've seen Stamann at times really kind of just give away the big moments in these fights. And even though I think he's the better minute winner, I expect him to stay on the outside, pump that jab, mix in the leg kicks, mix in the wrestling. We know he comes from a collegiate wrestling background. But a guy like Silva de Andrade, what he still has is big power. And if it's going to be similar to a lot of Stamann rounds where it's just sort of empty volume, even though he's winning on thin margins, and big moments from Silva de Andrade could potentially swing those rounds. So unless Stamann comes in here and wrestles super heavy, I just wouldn't feel confident laying chalk on him in this matchup. So where the pick is going to be Stamann by decision, because I think he's just an overall better round winner, but I think he's going to have to mind his P's and Q's not to give up those big moments to a guy like Silva de Andrade. And next up in the heavyweight division, this matchup was actually supposed to go down a couple weeks ago, and Chase Sherman pulled out of the fight after lineups locked on DraftKings. Super frustrating result. So I'll just put a little bit of caution out there, because we've seen this time and time again with Chase Sherman. He's kind of a pullout merchant that you never really know if he's going to fight that night until he's inside the octagon. And the reason why I say a little bit of caution here is because Carl Williams projects as a very good DraftKings player. We know that based on his history. He was a very popular fighter on that slate that Sherman pulled out of. I expect him to be one of the more popular fighters on this slate, because he's a minus 410 favorite with Chase Sherman, a big underdog at plus 330. And I think most people would expect Carl Williams to lean on that wrestling. He landed multiple takedowns in the Dana White Contender Series fight where he out-wrestled collegiate Penn State wrestling standout Jimmy Lawson, and then he followed that up in his UFC debut and landed takedown after takedown after takedown, scored very well. I think you have to project him to land multiple takedowns here against a guy like Chase Sherman, who only defends at 66%. Now, that being said, I do think Chase Sherman is a much better striker than Carl Williams, and I think if he's somehow able to keep this fight upright, he's going to have the bigger moments on the feet. There's no doubt about it that he's a better striker than Carl Williams. I just don't trust him personally to keep the fight on the feet. And then Carl Williams isn't much of a finisher on the mat. So I think I'm tempted to look at overs here depending on the price. I'm tempted to look at Williams by decision. I think it basically just comes down to whether or not you think he wins a decision or he wins inside the distance. I lean decision personally. I think Sherman is probably a little bit more live than these odds indicate. So I'm going to have a little bit of exposure again, just because these underdogs are not pretty this week. I don't think many of them win. I'm okay with mixing and matching some of these guys that I don't love and that are going to be lower owned that could potentially break the slate, and he fits that bill. So obviously Williams, heavy exposure to him as one of the better DraftKings plays, but don't shy away from Chase Sherman in lineups that do not have Carl Williams on the other side. And next up is the old man fight, because we have Court McGee at 39 years old, coming in as a minus 215 favorite. The comeback on 42-year-old Matt Brown is plus 185. And this is a matchup that I don't have a ton of interest in terms of DraftKings. I think the only way this fight really burns you is if A, Matt Brown pulls off a big upset, coming by knockout, that's likely how he has to win, or B, we just see a complete slugfest where both guys maybe land a couple knockdowns or something crazy like that. And that's not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen that happen before in some of these sloppy fights where the durability is kind of a question mark on both sides. But I think more times than not, I think McGee is just a better fighter at this stage in his career. I know he's coming off a knockout loss. We've seen the durability kind of come into question over his last couple fights. We've seen him rocked multiple times, but I do just think he's going to be throwing more volume on the feet for sure. He's going to be landing more on the feet. I think he's a better wrestler as well, averages around 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. And I just was not inspired whatsoever by the Matt Brown performance against Brian Barberena his last time out. I believe I actually bet him in that spot. I thought it was a favorable matchup for him, and I still think it was a good matchup for him. I just think he looked maybe career worst in that spot, and he just looks like a shell of the guy that he used to be. Yes, he can still land a big shot, but he's not going to be throwing in volume. The body can't really take the damage anymore either, and if I can't really project him to wrestle successfully in this matchup either, then it's like, what are you really doing for me outside of landing a big punch? So I think we're going McGee by decision. That's the official pick. And kicking off the main card, we have Alex Morono, a minus 215 favorite, with the comeback on Tim Means at plus 185. And this is a matchup that I think Tim Means could potentially be one of those underdogs that might be live in this spot. And again, there's not many on this card. I'm trying to lay the case for one or two of them and basically try to nail the perfect nut lineup with one or two of those underdogs. And I think Means has the potential to be one of those. Reason being, we know he can match the pace and volume of Alex Morono early. The problem with Tim Means typically comes down to the cardio and the durability. He's been finished 8 times in his career, and we've seen him slow down as the fight progresses as well. So I do slightly lean Morono. He's a more well-rounded fighter in terms of the volume on the feet, a BJJ black belt as well. I doubt he can have much wrestling success against Tim Means. In fact, maybe Means might be able to mix in a takedown or two, but I do think Morono is probably the better submission grappler. But I mostly just expect this fight to play out on the feet with both guys throwing decent volume, both guys having moments. I slightly lean Morono because I trust his cardio and durability a little bit more, but it's not by much. So even though I'm picking Morono to win, this is another one like that Mandy Bohm fight where I'm picking the favorite, but in terms of DraftKings, I'm probably going to be heavier on the underdog in the Dirty Bird Means. And next up, we have Carlos Ulberg, one of the biggest favorites on the card at minus 410. The comeback on Ihor Potieria is plus 330. And Potieria is coming off a first-round knockout win over Shogun Rua in January. That should surprise absolutely nobody because Rua is completely washed at this point, and almost anybody could knock him out in the first round. So I'm not really going to give him too much credit there. I still have concerns with Pereira in terms of his cardio, his defensive grappling as well. Now he's facing somebody who's a very high volume striker, a very powerful striker in Carlos Ulberg. 5 of his 7 wins have come by knockout. Multiple of those have come inside the first round. And I just expect him to put a pace on Pereira from the opening bell. I expect him to be landing more on the feet. He's got some very powerful kicks as well. I think it's only a matter of time before he finds the chin of Pereira and breaks him down the stretch. So we're going Ulberg by knockout. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our welterweight matchup of the card. We have Ian Garry, a minus 300 favorite with the comeback on Daniel Rodriguez at plus 250. And this is a bet for me. I backed Daniel Rodriguez on the money line at plus 260 for a unit and a half. And this is what I alluded to earlier in terms of the underdog who I like the most on the slate. He is the only underdog that I actually picked to win this week. I mentioned I do think a lot of favorites win. I think Daniel Rodriguez is potentially the most live underdog, and the reason being, and I expect this to not be a popular take because Ian Garry, people seem to think he's like future champ material. I could not disagree more. I've been waiting to kind of fade this kid ever since I started watching him. I think Daniel Rodriguez projects to be a somewhat competitive matchup for him because reason being, we know neither guy is really going to look to grapple. Gary's never really looked to grapple. I think he landed 1 takedown in one of his fights, but he's not going to look to proactively grapple. Rodriguez doesn't really look to grapple either. So I expect this fight to play out on the feet for starters. Now, Gary's biggest issue, and I guess why I have a big issue seeing him as a constant big favorite as he starts to get tougher and tougher tests in the division, that striking defense is going to be a problem. We saw it almost expose him in his last fight against Kenan Song, who dropped him early in that fight. That's what you have to worry about when backing a guy like Garry, who is extremely hittable. Yes, he's a good striker, but that defense is going to get him chin checked at some point. There's no doubt in my mind. He's already been tagged multiple times. We saw even in his UFC debut, he got tagged. We saw in that last fight against Kenan Song. Now going up against a guy in Daniel Rodriguez, who I think is a better pure boxer than Ian Garry. Yes, he's probably a little bit slower, and that could be his demise here, but I think he can match the pace of Garry on the feet. He can match the volume, and I think he's got power as well. 8 of his 17 wins have come by knockout. It would not shock me whatsoever if we see Rodriguez start to have big boxing success against Garry because of that striking defense. So this is a fight that I have to project to be much closer to 50-50 than the current betting odds suggest. And I think a big majority of that is just because people have been constantly putting Garry on this pedestal. Yes, he's a good striker. He's young. He's improving. He's fun. He's got a big fan base behind him. But I think this could potentially be the matchup where we see him start to get exposed just because, again, the level of competition starts to get better. If you're not making those improvements, particularly on defense, I think he's going to pay at some point. So we're going Daniel Rodriguez by decision. That's the official pick, and he's my favorite underdog this week on DraftKings. Which brings us to our co-main event in the light heavyweight division as Anthony Smith comes in to fight Johnny Walker. This fight is currently priced as a pick'em. I bet Anthony Smith on the money line to win 2 units here at minus 110. I just think he's the better, more proven fighter. And I know there's concerns, particularly with his durability, but I think there's even more concerns with the durability of Johnny Walker. I think this is a fight that projects for some violence because both of these guys are not good round winners. We know Anthony Smith is mostly losing minutes in a lot of these matchups unless he can find a finish. 33 of his 36 professional victories have come inside the distance. And we know Johnny Walker is going to look to get you out of there early. He's coming off 2 first-round finishes of his own, putting together a nice little win streak here, but the durability is always a glaring concern. He's been knocked out 4 times in his career. We've seen him taken down and out grappled multiple times as well. So there's definitely some concerns on both sides, but I still think that Anthony Smith is just a more proven fighter. I trust the skill set more. I even trust the durability more than I do Johnny Walker. So even though I expect this to be violence, I'm going to lean with the more proven fighter in the veteran Anthony Lionheart Smith. I backed him on the money line. I also bet the under 1.5 at minus 130 to win 2 units as well. And that's because I just project a lot of violence here. And I think, yes, Smith probably gets the job done early, but if he doesn't, I think Walker's win condition is most likely a first-round finish. So it's kind of a way to hedge where if Smith does lose, it probably comes in round 1, so at least we cash the under. But hopefully Smith gets that first round finish and we cash both tickets as well. So this is one where I think it's going to be a popular fight on DraftKings to target because it's priced favorably in the mid-range. Both guys are going to carry some ownership. We know there's going to be violence, but I would be surprised if I don't have at least one piece of this fight across all my teams this weekend, because there's probably like 4 or 5 fights that I really like this week, and the rest I don't care about. And I think this one is probably my favorite when you factor in the price on DraftKings. Which brings us to the main event of the evening. We have Jailton Almeida, a minus 500 favorite, the biggest betting favorite on the card. The comeback on Jairzinho Rozenstruik is plus 400. And this is another great fight to target on DraftKings because obviously Rozenstruik at 6,600. If he pulls off a win, it's likely coming by an early knockout. And at 6,600, that's a lock for the optimal lineup. Now, do we think that happens at a high clip? Absolutely not. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. But on the other side is a very dangerous man in Jailton Almeida, who's a very explosive fighter. He's an impressive athlete. He's basically going to come in and take you to the ground immediately and dominate you on the mat. That's what he's done in most of his matchups. But his striking's not bad either. I do think he would be very foolish to try and strike with Rozenstruik here, who's a very powerful kickboxer, very good on the counter. I think that's probably the only way that Rozenstruik can win. But I do expect Almeida to just look to close distance, get this fight to the ground where he needs it, and that's where he's going to have a massive advantage. We've seen at times when Rozenstruik has been taken down, he can be controlled, doesn't really know how to work back to his feet. And I think facing a black belt who is so dangerous on the mat like Jailton Almeida, who is so powerful as well, I think it's only a matter of time, if he's able to get these takedowns, that he's able to find a finish there as well. So we're going Almeida by submission. That's the official pick, and he's one of the best plays on DraftKings as well. And as always, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have ownership projections, a couple other things as well. It's all completely free. I'll pin it in the comments. Do me a favor and hit that big red subscribe button. It helps me out a lot, and I definitely appreciate it. Best of luck, guys. We'll see you next time.